Stay with us because we're going to bring in right now Peter Baker, MSNBC political analyst and chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Dave Ehrenberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County. Welcome, guys. Listen, Dave, quickly, based on what we know about this lawsuit, do you think it has teeth? Because the Wall Street Journal is standing by its reporting. Would the Journal risk a lawsuit like this if it didn't have what it sees as irrefutable proof?
Alex, there is no way that a Rupert Murdoch-owned publication would put this out there unless they had the goods. This lawsuit has no teeth.
All right, buckle up. This isn't just political theater, it's a full-blown legal thriller. Trump's legal team says, release everything. But here's the catch, legally, they can't. So is this transparency, or just performance?
This lawsuit was not meant for the courts. It was meant for the court of public opinion. It was meant for all of us. It was meant for his base to say, you see, he's fighting back. That letter must be false. Let me just put it this way. If that letter did not exist, if the letter does not appear in the Jeffrey Epstein file, then wouldn't the Attorney General have come out and said that? Wouldn't Kash Patel, Dan Bongino have access to the Epstein files? Wouldn't they come out and say, this letter doesn't exist? But they haven't said that, because the letter is in the file. Now, perhaps Trump can say that the letter is a fabrication. Someone else signed his name and pretended to be Donald Trump. Stretches the imagination, but okay. But even then, if that were the case, the Wall Street Journal article is not false. The Wall Street Journal article just talks about the existence of such a letter. It didn't say it was definitely Donald Trump who wrote the letter with his signature on it. So this lawsuit is going nowhere. It's meant for the show.
Let's talk Murdoch Media. If the Wall Street Journal, a Rupert Murdoch-owned outlet, is publishing this letter, you can bet they've got receipts. This lawsuit? It's PR warfare, not courtroom chess.
Not for the go.
So, Peter, nuts and bolts of all this. What do we know? What we don't know about these files? What's out in the public? What's still a mystery? And this letter, how much does it just pour gasoline on everything?
Yeah, the letter is fascinating because it does pour gasoline on it. It doesn't, on the other hand, answer the question that a lot of people have, right? The letter doesn't tell us something we didn't really know about Donald Trump. We knew he was prone to crude sexual banter. He used his locker room banter, he once said, of his Access Hollywood tape. We knew that he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. This obviously is a reminder of that, confirmation of that. It doesn't answer a lot of the questions a lot of people have, but it certainly fuels the fire. Absolutely keeps the story alive, and it encourages more suspicion that there might be more there to be hidden. You know, when the president says he wants to have grand jury testimony releases, of course, a judge has to approve that. That's not a given by any stretch. And B, a grand jury testimony isn't the entirety of the file. So the problem for the president is even if they released some
Now here's where it gets messy. Trump could claim the letter is fake, that someone forged it. But even if that's true, the existence of the letter is the bombshell, not who wrote it. Classic deflection playbook.
Even if they release some grand jury testimony, if they redacted it or they only release grand jury testimony, there's still going to be people out there saying, okay, what about the rest of the file? What about the things you're still not releasing? It's kind of a Pandora's box for him. Once he's opened that Pandora's box, it's awfully hard to shut it again.
Yeah. So, Dave, you're from Palm Beach. Of course, one of Jeffrey Epstein's mansions was there, so you may have some extra insight on this case overall. I'm curious your read on why the Trump administration seems to be against releasing whatever information they have on the Epstein case.
I think you're seeing it with this letter, that they are worried that Donald Trump will get caught up in the Epstein scandal. But really, they need to level with their base. It's well known and accepted that Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. They hung around the same circles. It doesn't mean that Trump was engaged in child sex trafficking or anything illegal, but Trump doesn't want the smoke. And the way that he's fighting so fiercely about this letter tells you why they don't.
Peter hits it here. This letter doesn't tell us anything new, but it throws gasoline on a burning fire. Trump's friendship with Epstein was always shady. This letter just throws the receipts on the table.
Files released. So it is perplexing if he's blaming Pam Bondi for not being transparent when the directives come from the White House. Pam Bondi's not doing anything unless the White House instructs her to do it. So this could be a case of scapegoating here. He may need a head on a wall somewhere to show his base that he's doing something. But in the end, these are his decisions, and he can end this controversy by just releasing all the files with certain redactions for victims. But he doesn't want to do that.
I'm going to pick up on that with you, Peter. I mean, we never thought we'd see this in the current political climate, but you have Democrats now siding with Trump's MAGA-based demands to see the Epstein files. Is President Trump showing signs of wavering under this growing pressure? I mean, is the request for Pam Bondi to release parts of the grand jury transcripts his version of a compromise, and do you think it'll work?
Well, it is his way of trying to silence things for a little while. No question about it. Look, he found earlier in the week that he couldn't just simply dictate to his base and say, enough is enough, let's focus on something else. He tried. He told them they were being fooled into demanding it, that it was a boring case, it was over, we shouldn't be thinking about it, there are more important things to think about, and they didn't listen. And so, yeah, he's trying to see if he can find a way to quell this furor and force people not to think about other things. It hasn't worked so far, and that's really striking because in the 10 years he's been on the national political stage since first, announcing that presidential run from the escalator in Trump Tower in 2015.
Audience check-in. Why do you think Trump is resisting full release of the Epstein files? If there's nothing to hide, why all the smoke and mirrors? Drop your theory in the comments.
He's had pretty good control over his base. They've disagreed with him on some things. There have been moments of tension, but nothing like this. And I think that he is frustrated and finding it, difficult to figure out how to go forward because all the usual tools haven't worked for him.
So, Dave, on July 1st, 2024, testimony from Epstein grand jury from 2006, it was released. This is from the Associated Press. Here's the quote. Transcripts show the grand jury heard testimony that Epstein, who was then in his 40s, had raped teenage girls as young as 14 at his Palm Beach mansion. And Dave, this was 2 years before prosecutors cut a deal with Epstein. Is this exactly part of the growing outrage? And if you were investigating, what would you ask for? What would you want to know from the FBI or even local investigators in Palm Beach?
What you're referring to, Alex, are the grand jury transcripts from the state prosecution, and there was a big hullabaloo about that. And those transcripts could not be released until the law in Florida changed. Governor DeSantis pushed a law that carved out a special exception to release these transcripts. And so you may have to have something similar in Congress to release the federal transcripts, the grand jury transcripts. But even then, you're just talking about a portion of what the public wants. What the public wants, to your question, is they want the names of the individuals to whom these young women were trafficked to. And that could be subject to court orders that could prevent it. But there's nothing to stop the Trump administration and say, okay, anything not subject to a court order, anything not subject to victim protections, we're going to release. So I think that's what we all want to know at this point. And getting to the grand jury transcripts relating to Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell is not going to get you there. That only pertains to their particular charges. It doesn't pertain to the third parties. That's what everyone's interested in. And yet I don't think we're going to see it.
You have Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, Dave, who says FBI agents were told to flag any Epstein records mentioning Trump. What does that signal?
That signals all hands on deck to protect them.
Trump's usual playbook, control the narrative, distract the base, is failing here. MAGA loyalists are breaking rank, demanding answers. This isn't just political pressure, it's a loyalty test in real time.
Because they want to know what Trump's involvement in is in the Epstein files. They're so concerned that there are smoking guns and they're tying Epstein to Trump. Well, this letter is an example. This is the kind of thing they don't want out to the public. That's why Trump's filing this lawsuit. And so they had these FBI agents scour the files to see if there's anything really damaging to the president. Now, that's sort of, I think, asking the FBI to do too much, but this is the Trump administration, and they get away with a lot more than anyone else does. So I'm not surprised by the request, but it does show how they're using their own resources, the FBI, to serve a boss of one, not the American people.
You know, Yamiche, you mentioned how the president's getting increasingly frustrated with Pam Bondi. But to what extent do you think it's possible she would become a scapegoat? Did she mishandle this? Is that anything that's being whispered there in the hallowed halls of the White House?
Well, sources tell NBC News that at this moment, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, is not at risk of losing her job because she's been fiercely loyal to President Trump. That's also why you've heard President Trump over and over again praise her, saying she's doing a fantastic job, even as people like Megyn Kelly and other conservative influencers and prominent voices were pushing the president to fire Attorney General Pam Bondi. It's also that the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, she is also a fan of Pam Bondi. So, and by the way, Pam Bondi is seen as someone who's just doing what the White House is telling her to do. The other thing to note here that I think is really important is that the Trump base, they see the Trump White House and Trump administration as doing the president's bidding. The president's made it very clear that he is the one making all of these decisions. So it's really interesting. At Turning Point USA, this conservative conference last weekend, we had people talking to us directly about President Trump, and they said we elected President Trump to be transparent and not to...
Hold up, the FBI allegedly told agents to flag any Epstein files that mention Trump? That smells like damage control at the highest level. Are we watching the unraveling of a cover-up?
Protect in their minds this Epstein list. So the president's base isn't blaming Pam Bondi in most ways. They're really saying at the end of the day, the buck stops with the president. It's also important to note that the president, as he was posting today, saying that he wants all the grand jury testimonies released, he also said, I don't think it's going to be enough and that people are going to want more and more and more. So the president's also in some ways trying to get ahead of the idea that even if he fired Pam Bondi or even if he released more files, he understands already that the base is going to push for more because, as Dave just said, what people really want to see is this alleged client list that the DOJ and FBI says does not exist right now, that there's no evidence of it.
So, Peter, you have far-right activist and very close ally of the president, Laura Loomer, who warns the Epstein controversy could consume Trump's presidency. Does President Trump and the administration share that concern? I mean, how do you see this ending? How do they see, or at least hope, this ends?
Well, look, this president has been on the receiving end of so many different controversies, so many different furors, so many different scandals, things that would have ended any normal political career. And many of course, his own making. He has survived all of them. They feel, some degree of confidence that they're able to move past this controversy or that controversy, but this one has flummoxed them because it hasn't gone away as quickly as the other ones. In 6 months now in his second term, all kinds of things that were big controversies came and went within 24 hours or 48 hours. This is one of the few that's been pretty sticky, pretty hard to make go away. And because it involves the people who have been his most vocal supporters as opposed to people who didn't like him to begin with. Look, he's gonna work his base as best he can. He's gonna try to find other enemies for them to focus on, right? He's talking about Jay Powell. He's talking a lot about Joe Biden. He's talking a lot about, the Wall Street Journal, anybody he can find to sort of refocus that MAGA energy and anger at, he's going to try to do. But again, I think he's been frustrated so far that it hasn't worked.
Peter's final take is chilling. This isn't a hit from the left. It's backlash from within Trump's own base. The letter won't go away, the file won't vanish, and now, neither will the questions.